Try this. I don't give people the blues, but consider the almost smothering weight of the cut and dried. Everybody's confronted with this individually, and we get confronted with it collectively. After all I've pointed out of the need eventually to do something in a more public manner, and while assuming that all of you understand by now that it has nothing to do with getting a following for me, and it really has nothing to do with establishing some kind of, quote, religion, but you should, even you newer people, should understand that there seems to be, let me understate it, that there seems to be some kind of energy problem of things moving in a certain way, the way in which we're operating now, and me apparently picking up people here and there, all across the country and other parts of the world, little bits and pieces. And I'm fully aware that very few of you have any understanding, nor should you have any need to, as to the fact that trying to spread this kind of information throughout life's body cannot simply stay with one small group of people. And small is not the key word. If we had 5 times as many people sitting here as we have now, the day would come that the 5 times that those increased number of people would be insufficient. There is an equation of energy. It's a simple fact. So when you're confronted with the possibility, or me mentioning the possibility that something someday has got to be done, or you've got to do something a little more publicly, do something in what appears to be a more organized form, then it comes up, whether I say it or not, people surely think of it, you know, how would you go about it? How about just the logistics? How about just the fact of, are we going to be in the same position as all the churches, all the would-be mystical groups of, hey, everybody, you got to sell everything you've got and you got to go in debt. We all got to have large sums of money yesterday. Then you look around, and on almost every street corner, it would seem, there is a church. There is a synagogue. There is some sort of meeting place for some group of people. And then from one viewpoint, that many of you should have close to your bosoms, if not your brains by now, is the fact that for a certain number of people and for certain purposes of life itself, this is more important than 50,000 churches. And yet they seem to have no problem coming up with a building, coming up with people, because of the almost smothering weight of the cut and dried. Pick out a religion with which you're familiar, perhaps that of your forefathers, or pick out a new one, drive down the street, take a look at some great temple, one of these great southern or northern Baptist churches, that they have spent enough or as much on the columns out front to put half of us in Corvettes. And they're everywhere. And you should know by now you go inside, and from the viewpoint of life actually doing something that would seem to be closer to a creative edge, they're not. You should know by now, you should be able to go in and you could predict what they're going to say. Not just the run of the service, but predict what the attitude of the people would be, what the attitude of the apparent leader or minister or rabbi. Everything he's going to say every sentence he starts, but now if you have any familiarity with life itself, you should be able to finish almost any sentence such a person would start. And so from one viewpoint, you should feel as though this would be a good place to take an extended nap. So what brings these people out other than the social energy of sex, or just getting out of the house? Or what is it other than just the lowest denominator of life trying to keep itself alive and trying to stay in balance? Hence my term, the cut and dried. So then, as some of you have wanted to do, you could ask yourself, would it not be a simple thing for us, for me, to do something that would certainly belie any description of some activity on a public level being cut and dried? And if you were to ask me, I guess I could say, certainly. I could ask you, by now couldn't you come up with something? And you should say, certainly. And what would it be? Well, we will all dress up in purple chicken suits. We will say that we have indeed been given a message that God is either kudzu or electricity or tofu. We will make up our own language. We will talk backwards. As you should know, that would be good for a very small chuckle. That is not going to put forward life's intention to grow in a certain profitable fashion. And yet look how much of life, and I was not just singling out religion and would-be mystical activity, how much of life now, since most of you are now beyond the age of 21, how much of life seems to be cut and dried? I guess we can take 30 seconds and everybody ponder this. I don't want to give you enough time to actually get the blues. But then revert back to where I started. How about that which would apparently be in charge of something exciting? That which at first blush would seem to be life trying to move in a more progressive, a more creative manner, to wit, religions would be forms of mysticism. And yet the very structures, the very systems that life seems to put out is almost the smothering weight of the cut and dried doubled compared to, say, politics, economics, personal relations. What could apparently be more cut and dried, more smothering for those who have had at least a small whiff of something else to go back now and to sit in a church or a synagogue, to sit there and attempt to take it in a personal manner, to take it in a way in which you could apparently use it individually, that it is actually going somewhere, that the people involved know where it's going. You should feel smothered, somewhere between that and seriously sleepy, but almost smothered on the basis, you should, if you could do it correctly, but now not in a, of course, in any critical sense, but that you would sit there and listen to what they were saying and have such passing sensations as, the words are right, except no one here is interested in the reality behind it. Everyone takes it literally. It is so cut and dried that I can hardly get my breath. So the question is, if you were going to do something, what would you do? Now on to the next subject. People continue to ask you and some of the older people about the possibility of there being certain types of people that they have read about it, they have suspected it. I guess most of you read about it somewhere. The old idea that Muhammad's original men of the bench represented a cross-section of all possible human types, or that the disciples of Jesus represented 12 types of people in some way. Even psychology has attempted to come up with a rough paradigm based upon really red circuit manifestations. But the question of there being types has some validity, or else it would not continue to be written about and people would not be interested. And normally I have turned away most questions like that. But the time has come that you should be able to stick your nose into it a little bit. Based upon what little I'll remind you of I'm going ahead and continue to draw the circuits in that manner. But remember, I started out the other several weeks ago and pointed out that all three circuits, if we were to isolate them, could be considered, and you can see it. That's what I'm about to point toward. You can see manifestations of it, that each circuit has what amounts to three different levels. And that really has to do as to where one circuit touches the other one. Now, as far as there being types, everyone should have an almost certainty that there are limited, let me be charitable. Instead of limited, almost all of you should be absolutely certain, or almost certain, that there are types of people that continue to be reproduced. That you see somebody here, and 10 years later, half a continent away, you see somebody, and they are the spitting image. And just what little you see, there's just no doubt. You see them move, or you walk into a room, and there they stand, and you just know that is Fred. And of course, you know it's not Fred, but you know that is Fred. And once I pointed out, if you hadn't thought about it, there'd be no doubt. If I go talk to that sucker, he's going to be a right-wing fanatic. He's going to be married to a big old fat woman. He's going to have a house full of kids. And you're right. Or you're right enough to say you're right. What appears to be types, and I'm not going into any number, I'm going to leave some of this open-ended tonight. But you can be typed, everyone could, by the specific circuitry connections. I'm going to pull out just 2 or 3 examples. I'll try to make them crude enough to almost be archetypical. Now, I'm having to isolate things even more so than perhaps normally. But if we took the lower part of the yellow circuit, where it would be touching the red, and if we said that that was the front door of that person, if that was the primary place in which the transformation of energy was centered, as that which seemed to be the heart of their so-called personality, we would have a person speaking in one area whose speech was almost a living example of mechanical thought. The kinds of people that speak in cliches, the kind of people that speak, as far as possible, entirely in the hip phrases of the day. They're the kind of people that you can stand and apparently carry on a conversation, or someone else can. If you wrote it down and looked at it, you would think, well, this came out of a book, a fairly poor joke book, but supposedly, if we said this was a human speech of somebody over 10 minutes, you'd think, well, some would-be jokester wrote this because it is nothing but cliches. Now, whether you noted, everyone has met someone like that, and some of you, I assume, have looked in the mirror. If that sounds too personal, then all of you should have some nodding acquaintance with the partner. Because to varying degrees, whether the partner is the partner or whether the partner is you, there is always a lot of mechanical talk going on. In line with that kind of connection between the lower part of the yellow circuit and to the red circuit where it would be connecting, since I'd already used that example, you would also find not just mechanical talk, but you would find it going into other areas such as so-called political persuasions. That is where you would find that which all over this planet is referred to as conservative, right-wing, reactionary. You would have the archetypical redneck person from Alabama who believes that anything that's happened since he was perhaps 20 years old, perhaps Franklin Delano Roosevelt, World War II, since then, it's been, it's the communists, it's the Trilateral Commission, it's Yankees, it's foreigners, new wave music, rock and roll music, painting that doesn't look like anybody, literature that somebody just pulled out words and pasted them together. Even if they didn't use, at that time, religious terminology, their political speech, being that the yellow circuit, a certain place where it's connected to the red, and that seemed to be the focus of their so-called consciousness, it comes out and it's a form of evil, but it comes out in political speech. If you had the lower part of the yellow circuit, whereas touching parts of the blue circuit, and you had that to be the focus, that was sort of the front door of that person, you would then have those people whose talk seems to be almost entirely involved with the melancholy. That no matter what you say to them, if you were not their particular type, whatever is said to them, their apparent response, the glasses that they would apparently be wearing, always comes out in some kind of melancholy comment. You know, life is indeed a bitch. Almost anything you say. Did you have nice holidays? I haven't seen you since your birthday. How was it? Oh, most of my friends didn't show up. I heard you finally graduated from college after all these years. Yeah, and now I can't get a job. Yeah. And which is a little harder to talk about, but let me point out, I'm talking about just the ordinary level. If you get into the higher areas of the yellow circuit, wherein it is as far removed as mechanically possible from the rest of line level consciousness, you would be closer to the areas that would approach dispassionate thought, which is simply regaining to the realm, if there was such a thing, as pure science. But you would be into an area where that particular person's circuitry and the focus of their circuitry and what they were transforming and transmitting, all this circulation within life's body, as it went through the yellow circuit, it would apparently be as close as possible to dispassionate thought. You could also type everybody on this planet biochemically by the ways in which they act and by the ways in which they think about acting. When you think, if you have been interested in it, in types of people, I'm not going much further with examples, but something should strike you. Whatever seems to strike you, of course, do not take it as being the Word of God. Do not take it as being, I see it all, and I'll take the rest of the day off. And of course, by no means ever put a period of, I see it. I see something, comma. But there are enough of you with diverse experiences and wiring that I perhaps should drag up 2 or 3 other examples. All of you have met someone, maybe he was your kid brother, maybe he was a cousin, he was a kid that was a next-door neighbor of your kid brother. Just a real wise ass, but with a modicum more than average intelligence, sometimes referred to as hip. He may have a way with words, he may be good at puns, he may be able to make fun and be sarcastic in ways that would belie his young age. And he may have a smidgen of some kind of talent. He may be able to play a 3-chord blues on the guitar. He might be able to get a job in a real cheap heavy metal band in a small town. He might be able to draw just enough that people who can't draw look at it and go, wow, you know, you should pursue this, you've got talent. And he immediately says some smart comment, probably at your expense. that there seems to be some sort of creative activity in this child. He seems to be quick-footed on his brain, a smidgen of some little observable talent, and after that it's almost garbage mouth. But literate, able to verbalize. All of you should know somebody like that. That is a type. And it has to do with where the circuits are connected in him and where is the focus of his transformations of life's own energy. All of you should have somebody in your family, some relative, a person that seems to have almost an innate charitable nature, that seems to be a nice person. You never heard them express any great hostility or prejudice against people. But perhaps even their facial countenance puts out a message of not life is a bitch with an edge to it, but isn't life a sorrowful journey? And even when they seem to be philosophical in speech, that is, if someone said to them, "Did you know Miss So-and-so is back drinking again, her husband left her?" You know, good ordinary gossip, and the person may say, "Well, you know, none of us know the real personal problems that another person has." I didn't do that very good because it comes out, and if you took it verbally, you put it on a printed page, it might sound as though, hey, we have the makings of a down-home philosopher. But the person in person, the message would be, well, none of us know the kind of problems that another person actually experiences. The emotional message comes through that they're placing themselves in that also. That you don't know. You don't know how the terrible demons with which I wrestle internally. You don't know how I suffer in quiet desperation. And yet it's yellow circuit-wise, if we isolated just the words, it apparently would be almost a philosophical person. Well, we'll get back to this somewhat with the task that I had in mind. Something else I wanted to ask. There are several things I thought I would ask from some of my comments for the last several weeks. Can any of you perceive any sort of symbiotic relationship between you and the partner? Now, try for the sake of this rhetorical question to abandon that most common immediate feeling that the partner is my enemy, and then try to abandon me even saying he's not your enemy. Just abandon all of that and look at it as a kind of everyone knowing what a symbiotic relationship is, like that little bird whose name I forgot that rides on the back of a rhino, a little fish that attaches itself to a shark forever. The little fish and the little bird, by all reports, help clean up scraps, pick off bugs and fleas if sharks had bugs and fleas, but help keep them clean, and the shark leaves them alone. They both seem to serve one another. Not getting into who's getting the better of the deal, but a symbiotic relationship is that there is some kind of attachment and that they are both serving one another. So, try and put away any question of there being a propriety to a possible symbiotic relationship, but just confront the question, is there any possible symbiotic relationship of any kind between oneself, as it appears to be, and the partner? Closely connected to that, as I'm sure none of you will see, is question number 2. Would you say that life in any way made mortal existence ergonomically efficient? Question 2A. If so, for life or for man? That is very close to question number 1. Subject number 3. Can any of you see the so-called consciousness, ordinary consciousness, is the original and the consummate social climber? In that it appears to have completely forgotten, or else it absolutely denies its most common molecular background. Now, I don't know about you, but that kind of attitude, to me, fits the definition of a fucking social climber. But beyond any accidental humor that you may have found in that, who could deny, given that peculiar view that all of you should be able to adopt temporarily, what would be more of an original? What could be a more consummate social climber than ordinary consciousness? Just as those people that apparently are who people out in life, ordinary people that apparently, as life would have us believe, are in charge, and there's some rationale, some freedom behind what they do. The proverbial social climber, the guy suddenly who pops up, the Gatsbys, the man who suddenly pops up, has all the trappings of success and money. Nobody knows where he came from. They try to question him. It all seems to be a mystery. Or if he answers it all, just a small amount of investigation reveals that it was a tissue of lies, that the man was not from a family of exiled royalty that was thrown out of Yugoslavia after World War I. And he was not married to a cousin of the princess or the pretender to the throne of Greece who had tuberculosis and died in a turret somewhere. Turns out that the man made his money. He grew up in Gulfport, Mississippi, and made his money raising on a catfish farm, trucking rudabakers, and then gambled. A social climber. That he denies his background, or I was being charitable when I started this, or else he has forgotten it. So that he can either be caught in a lie and try to talk his way out, or say you got me, or else say, you know, you could be right because I'm unclear myself. Maybe you're right. Maybe my story, I get them confused. But to be this kind of consummate social climber that I was back attributing to ordinary consciousness, it either, based upon the way it operates, which I'm fixing to point out a bit more of, it either has absolutely forgotten its roots, or else it absolutely denies them. And its background is the most common, and that's not a negative statement, I just mean it's as common as the roots of his liver and his spleen. But it is apparently either totally forgotten or now just will absolutely deny its most common molecular background. After giving that a few seconds, can anyone deny that? speaking ordinarily, people could give you a better rundown on the history of where their shoes came from, where their last meal came from, the origins of the automobile that they're driving, that you're aware of the fact that this little number, that the body is now being built in Italy, it's thrown on a Chrysler chassis, and one of the plants that they have in Germany now, and it was imported here. People can come up with a background, apparently, of almost anything, to say the least, better than consciousness can apparently reveal its own source. I guess we could make that question 2B coming up. Does anyone find that curious? Question 2C, does anyone find it curious that no one thinks about that? Go on to weightier matters. I was once sitting in a restaurant recently, searching for sermon topics. Oh no, that's my other occupation. Some of you must forgive me those of you who don't know that I have a small Baptist church on the weekend. Those you new people out of town, that was a joke. But while I was sitting in this restaurant, wondering what my topic would be for my sermon Sunday, I overheard two people sitting at an adjoining table who evidently have been exposed to some of my material, because I was not listening specifically, but suddenly I heard one of the people say, well, it was obviously he was wrapping up a piece of some discussion they'd been having. He said, well, I've got my, and he pointed up here at his head, he said, I've got my molecules trained. Well, I didn't laugh that much, because I gave it serious consideration, thinking of the ways in which that could be used. I could have said that you could go a long way with that map. You could expand it in 4 or 5 directions of someone, not just this fictional person I just made up, but of any of you could reach a point. Part of that laughter, I wasn't listening for it, but part of that laughter hidden in there was probably, now that I listen back, there's probably a few of you who have almost said that same thing. It's almost the point that I could train my molecules, these. But as I sat there, a new question arose. Who was saying that? Again, you people on tape, you can't hear it. I wait for the laughter to go down. All this is not posing in dramatic pauses. I guess we'll have to put a microphone out so you can hear the laughter. Surely you people don't need a soundtrack like a TV sitcom to know when to laugh. But if the person, let's grant the person that I overheard that I made up, let's grant that they were somewhat above or outside the limits of line level consciousness and had a modicum of experience, if not understanding, of what they were saying when they said, I have got my molecules trained, end quote. But now back to this. Him saying, I have got my molecules trained. Who is saying that? And whoever it is you say saying that, what molecules is it that he has trained? And if you can come up with any ephemeral answer to that, then I've got to ask you this, question 2D. If you can come up with any kind of temporary answer as to who would be saying, I've got my molecules trained, if you can come up with two possibilities, then I've got to ask you 2D. Could it not be, whatever you come up with, could it not be vice versa? Of course, not as simplistic as just turning around the comment and saying, well, my molecules have me trained. No. Now, you people got to be better than that. In fact, I believe the Kyroots papers tonight, he mentioned something about the simplistic attempt to turn everything upside down or backwards. Subject 4. Any of you who are numbering these, you understand that it's like taking a carton of Neapolitan ice cream and putting it on a radiator. You can put numbers if you want to, just because I'm saying them. Just because I say subject 1, subject 2, for all you know, I'm just saying that to kill time to think about what I'm going to say next. Which I guess, before I die, is everybody waiting for some time for me to say at all, say anything about what it is, what's going on by me getting up here and talking? Nah. There'd be several possibilities. I could sort of tell you the truth, and most people wouldn't believe it, and I could sort of make up a reasonable lie, and most of you wouldn't believe it. And by saying nothing about it, most of you don't believe it either. Where was that? Subject 4? Maybe we should put a microphone out here so that I've never looked at the tapes, but it may appear funny to you people that I kill time, but I'm waiting for the laughter to subside so that I don't step on my own notes. Subject 4. By what words would one describe that which was not experienced by the senses? Now that should be plain enough in a particular way, but we are back to the almost smothering weight of the cut and dried, because it can be expressed in words that suit ordinary consciousness, because everything that is described at line level are descriptions of only one thing. Well, it's a process, but one thing, and that is that which has been experienced by the senses. That's all that you can talk about. That's it. So what is this about? Well, all of you should have some notion by now, some experience, that when this is right, whether it's reacting to something I've said, whether it's off on your own by now, when these moments strike you, and you see, whatever term you like, I'll continue to say that one, and you see beyond the three-dimensional world. You just have these experiences. What you're seeing is not an experience via the senses, because you don't literally, I periodically say that I'm in a different ball game as Socrates. He claimed he heard voices. And I say I see pictures. I don't see pictures. I throw that out sometimes because of the way I'm talking at the time, but I don't look around and suddenly see pictures. when you have these experiences, if you could now push consciousness back to that kind of time, if you get any flavor of it in retrospect, it's not that you saw something, and it's not that you heard something. It may have seemed to be triggered that there you stood, and one guy said, you know, sometimes I think that women are more trouble than there's worth. Another guy said, hey, you can say that again. And you have one of those moments of seeing, and if somebody insisted, all right, what happened? Now, I saw something strange run across your face, and you said, hey, I just had one of those experiences. And they said, well, what is it? And you said, well, the guy said, sometimes I think women are more trouble than they're worth. And the guy said, yeah, I know what you mean. And I saw something. I understood something. Then if the person said, you mean from that? You'd say, no. You mean, it's based on what he just said. You mean when the guy said, you can say that again, it opened up your eyes in some kind of mystical way? No. Well, what you saw, was it connected to that? You know, sort of. The truth could be, as far as you can tell, in a linear sequence. You could say, well, I would not have had that experience, evidently, had I not been staying there at that time, that place, with my clothes on, having eaten what I had just eaten. And if they had not said, if that little dialogue had not gone on, surely the little moment of seeing something wouldn't have happened. But it wasn't that I heard their voice. It wasn't that I saw the way they were standing when I said, hey, you can say that again. The experience was not via the senses. That is why you can't tell anybody about it. That's why anything that can be described ordinarily in a fairly acceptable and apparently efficient manner is you're only describing the experiences, as someone is, of their senses. The experiences that are not limited to the senses is where the problem comes in. It's where life, you could say, has its own problem, because it's not simply my problem, it's not your problem, singularly. Life does it to itself, but in certain areas of its body, it makes people have experiences that are not simply of the senses, that they are not sensory in the ordinary molecular fashion in which I've described it. Those people throughout life's history, through man, whoever they may have been, whoever you imagine they were, or whoever humanity says they are, those that apparently were religious prophets, mystical men, people who were more enlightened, people more awakened. Let's just assume that some of them you've read about. That was true. Then we're back to one of the questions I periodically present to you, is why is it that certain words, as inefficient as they are for real profit today, but the words that some person supposedly said 5,000 years ago, translated 3 different times, that if you've got any understanding just at all, you know how questionable it is to translate something from one language to another, or for one person to tell another person in the same language. But then to translate it once, then translate it 3 times, it's been 5,000 years, and you can yet read it, and it's just good old simple words, and oftentimes it seems to have some effect. It seems to have some impact. And the words, you take them apart, and it doesn't mean much. There's nothing astounding. You can say, well, I've heard that before. Put a different way. It sounds familiar. It's not. How are you to describe? How is one to describe that which is not experienced through the senses? It is only that, for those that belong in this, it is only that is of any value. But I have now repeated that question of by what words is one to describe that which was not experienced through the senses. Only that which someone has experienced beyond the limits of the senses is the kind of proper and necessary food that everyone seeks that becomes involved with this. And it eventually, to some small degree perhaps, becomes one of your own difficulties of what you have seen, what life has made you see, what life has made you experience was not via the limited molecular experience of the senses. That is why it has a kind of nourishment. That is why it is astounding, mystical, cosmic, enlightening, awakening, shocking, anything you care to call it. Of course, if you had any sense, you wouldn't call it anything. But if you cared to call it anything, that's what it was. It was somewhere within that range of adjectives. But then how are you going to describe it? What possible words are you going to put on it when it was not words being a function of the senses, words being a molecular activity, words being a reaction to other molecular activity? When that was not the source of it, what words are one to conjure up to describe such a non-sensual, sensual experience? How come nobody can understand anything? Conversely, how come people can't understand anything when everybody, let's say, more or less, has 2 eyes, 2 ears, a brain, a mouth, they can feel, they can be pleased and stroked, they can be punched and hurt. Apparently everybody's got the same chance. Most everybody could be literate. People can hear somebody talk that says, hey, I know what's going on. So why is it that anything that can be experienced through the senses for the few people is, to say the very least, less than satisfying? And to say a little bit more, is non-nutritious. Someone says, listen, I've been through what you've been through. Let me tell you the harshness, the experiences I went through of giving up my life and traveling to find my secret teacher in India or Afghanistan. What it cost me, how it wrecked my health, the times I thought I was going crazy, the many times I stayed up trying to translate the dead master's words, and they'll bring you back this experience. You say, yeah. Most people go through this at some stage. Should have been a good while back. But yeah. Ooh, you're what I've been looking for. Yeah. You've been where? You've actually been there? And you met weird people? You met people that speak a different language? You met all those people? Yeah, tell me what happened. And they tell you the experiences of the senses. It might be as good as seeing a National Geographic special on PBS, but as far as what you're looking for, there is nothing. It's always, yeah, and you keep waiting. Well, enough about other people. What is it that your partner talks to you about? He can talk to you about only one thing. He can talk forever on it, though, but on the experiences that he has had through the senses. And you listen to it. Now, if we want to go back and talk about cut and dried, I could make that one of the definitions. The kind of laughter and heaving and sighing that some of you did when I started off talking about the almost smothering weight of the cut and dried. Most of you seem to have had some notion as to what you thought I meant. I can give you a definition of cut and dried, what I mean by it. One definition, cut and dried is anything that has been experienced through the senses. So it does not matter what sort of building. If I said, all right, we need to do something more publicly, and we've got this money arranged, and here it is, let's all get together, and we're going to design it, we're going to build it, and everybody join in. If I didn't do it, everybody join in, give me your suggestions. How will it operate? What kind of system? What will we call ourselves? I suggest to you that if we took that approach, we would make, the story of the Tower of Babel appeared to be a class in meditation. As many people as we had, assuming that all of you were not making some extraordinary effort, if it was just all running at line level, we would have as many examples of cut and dried as we have people involved. We would have everyone giving the benefit of their experience. All right, now let's quit talking about everybody again. Back to you and the partner. When one apparently is listening to thoughts, to the so-called either murmurings of your own conscious mind or your so-called unconscious mind, the musings of your own imagination, the freewheelings of ordinary daydreams, what are you hearing? You're hearing descriptions of experiences limited to the senses. And you never received anything from it. Don't take that as being the kind of line I would do on Sunday over at the church. Have you ever received anything from it? And the answer is, so where is one to look? How is one to know when one found it? Well, I don't know, but the most extraordinary thing happened to me. Let me tell you about it. Really? No. But it was extraordinary. Well, tell me about it. And yet some of you that even find or claim to be fascinated with the idea of me saying you should never tell yourself what you're going to do if you decide to do something. I'm going to lose weight, I'm going to quit eating sugar, I'm going to quit drinking coffee, I'm going to quit getting mad. You should never tell yourself. If you're going to be limited, if you're already preordained this upcoming attempted process or this attempted change, if you're going to preordain it via words to be limited to experiences that you're going to have through the senses, then you might as well watch Sesame Street. You might as well drink coffee and eat sugar. You might as well do whatever it was you're going to do. Subject strawberry, 5. We already did chocolate and vanilla. We'll be back to subject 5 as soon as they turn the tape over. Don't go away. That great strawberry subject. I used the term earlier. I was talking about front door energy, or the front door of someone's consciousness. And at one time I started to draw out a map having to do with that, and I never did, but I'll mention a little bit now. I would have started off referring to the front door of someone would be that which apparently is their personality, is apparently their individuality. But also in conjunction with the kinds of things I was pointing out, that everyone could be, quote, typed in a sense, based upon, if you could see it, based upon the circuitry connections. That is, that they would have a front door, let us say, that apparently would be where the lower part of their yellow circuit touched the mid part of their blue circuit. That would be, if you could see it, and I'm not going to describe it much, but that could be described. Would be limited to what could be molecular, conveyed by words. But once you see it, it's beyond sensual experience. It's not limited to that you can see Not that my detailing of the lower part of the yellow circuit touching the mid part of the blue circuit, it's meaningless, but you suddenly begin to see somebody operates, and it might come back to you that, yeah, I know what you meant. But not limited to the words, that they are serving a purpose, that there are certain kinds of energy that they take in. There are certain kinds of things they hear, there are certain things they're interested in life, there are certain kinds of people that they're attracted to, there are certain things that they talk about over and over, there's certain limited amount of feelings that they experience over and over and over and over, a few little illnesses they have over and over and over and over. It's like their front door. It's like the main place of their part of life's business, of whatever it is, the kinds of specific energies. Once you can see it, and I'm not going to put names on them, but they take in certain kinds of energies, they chew them up, they transform them, and they pass it along. It's helping life's body. It's the circulation of energy within life's body to help it live and to grow. We're all doing it, whether you want to or not, whether you see it or not. But what people would normally refer to as one person's individuality is what I at one time was tempted to come up with a new map and refer to it as the front door. But I could also point out that beyond what seems to be one's center of focus, their center of gravity, that everybody then, beyond that, has a back door. There are at least two, count them, two side doors, still having to do with the ways in which their circuitry is connected. That once you begin to see it and you catch something perhaps that's fairly crude that I've already described, right? Here's the kind of person, they not only speak very mechanically and they speak in cliches. I mean, they may speak with great passion. They may start hollering about communists taking over and liberals. And as soon as they start, you know what he's going to say. You can finish every sentence, and yet he seems to be passionate about it. You can also see, you just know it. Maybe you see him first sitting down at a bar talking, and he stands up to go to the bathroom, and as soon as he starts to walk, you know. You can't describe it, you don't know anything, but there he is. That you knew that the guy's going to move like that. It's just right, by God, it's just right. It couldn't be otherwise. All right? If you fought into that, I could say that that's getting close to what I would have referred to, perhaps, as the man's side door. Not necessarily the center, or not necessarily the most important part of how he is transforming energy. It's not his front door, but it's other little things that, by God, you just knew it as soon as it happened. That's just words. As soon as he got and walked, you knew. If I'd said beforehand, all right, do you believe you can see that kind of type? Do you see something there? And you might say, yeah, I do. And I said, all right, he's about to get up. And I stop everything. I freeze reality. And I say, how's he going to move? And the truth is, you might say, I don't know. I wish I did. But I hear what you're saying. But I don't know. I can't even imagine. But if you could see his front door, and if I let reality take back over and the film keep going, he got up. And you said, no, I don't know. I can't tell you. I wish I could. I know what you're asking, but I can't think. I don't know. If you ever see his front door, and you got a general grasp on what seems to be the basis of his, quote, type, then as soon as he got up and walked, perhaps you couldn't have predicted, but as soon as he did, non-verbally, you would know this. Of course, non-verbally, I was just attempting to do what I'd already done verbally a couple of minutes ago, is that, yeah, it had to be that way. I couldn't have predicted it. I didn't know what to describe, but yes, there is experience beyond the senses. Because you did not have any experience beforehand, you say, all right, I'm beginning to see, I know what you meant by, quote, type, or what everybody's always meant, and I get a feeling. I can't see it, of course. You can't look at somebody and see yellow circuits and them touching blue circuits. Come on. I never told you that I see those circuits in those colors. I might, but I never told you that. But you see, not through the eyes, you see. You hear him talk, and it's not through your ears, and he's there, and he's making some hand gestures, and he's sitting on the stool in a certain way, and he's banging on the bar. But it's not what you see through your eyes, it's not what you hear through your ears, but you get a feel. It is a non-sensual, sensual experience that, yeah, and then he gets up to move and you couldn't have predicted it, there's nothing in your past experience that made you predict it. And he doesn't walk. I don't mean anything real weird. You just can't predict it, but he gets up, and it's... What I'm trying to convey is, it has to be. Yes, that is right. It couldn't be otherwise. I didn't know it, but now that I see it, not through my eyes. Because if I froze reality and grabbed everybody else in that bar and I said, you see this guy I'm talking to, how weird he's acting? You know the way he is. You see that guy walking to the bar? Is there anything weird about him? They'd look. No. Their eyesight's as good as yours. But what you saw was not a sensual experience. The experience was not limited to molecular activity of the eyes, the ears, smell. A little bit more about this front door energy, since I may not ever return to it, or I might. But I suggest that any of you who thought you heard something is not only take the front door should be fairly obvious, but that every, quote, type, which is just a word, but if you can see somebody's front door, they have a back door, and they have at least two that you can see. If you can see the front and the back, you can always see at least two side doors. I'll leave that with you. But back to the front door energies, perceiving that, as I'm describing it, as sort of the primary transformation function that a person is serving. Once your front door energies become unnecessary, it's when life extends that with you. But back to the front door energies, perceiving that, as I'm describing it, as sort of the primary transformation function that a person is serving. Once your front door energies become unnecessary, it's when life extincts you. And under ordinary conditions, and even under extraordinary conditions. But first, under ordinary conditions, life extincts everybody. But life begins to extinct people, ordinarily, before they turn into Alpo worm food. It is oftentimes referred to, I guess, by most ordinary people as aging. Because other than that great glorious moment when life directs you to buy the farm, to get thee on the floor and arise no more, before the big extinct, life begins to extinct you gradually. Now, I know physiologically speaking, it can be pointed out that the human machine seems to run down in a quite physical way. But all of you should be aware of the fact we have various ages in here, but since none of you are teenagers anymore, you should be aware of the fact that the body seems to begin to wear down a little bit, even by your mid-20s. And you look around you, if you're not that much older, but you look around you, and people that seem to be just 5 or 10 years older than you seem to have gone down here very quickly. I got less desire to move about. I got less desire to chase women, to chase men, to chase a ball. Getting beyond the red circuit. I seem to have less, I don't know. I used to worry about the world situation, but damn, I don't think we can do anything about it. I'm tied up with a family now. I don't have time. I can't get out to march. I can't I don't know. We protested back in the 60s. What good did it do? You know what I mean? Forget it. Your primary energy, your front door energies are becoming gradually unnecessary for life at that time where you are. And as that happens, life extincts you. And to continue this so as not to become an absolute purveyor of cut and driedness, you have to learn to develop a certain kind of flexibility that comes from not having the circuits operate in a completely stagnant manner. And a kind of flexibility will free you as much as possible from that fate. I should always try and be as truthful as possible and point out that all of this effort, all this, and to many of you, I know it still seems to be an exceedingly confusing and complex effort, and you and your partner imagine all that I have gone through, or other people in here that you think are more progressed along the great mystical path than you. All that seems to have great validity, except remember this. Molecularly speaking, biochemically speaking, you were somebody before you got here. And these old ideas, since I hadn't brought it up recently, of a man who says, look at my grandfather. The man was a carpenter, a house painter, and a ditch digger. He worked up until the day he was 65, and the people that he worked with, they just told him, we're not going to hire you anymore. Just, young guys need a job. Take it easy. He sat around the house 6 or 8 months, tried to fish, went down to the library, and I could see him almost begin to deteriorate before my eyes, and then he started running. He'd never done any exercise in his life, not sports exercise. And now, that old son of a gun, here he is, he's 83, he's running 10 miles a day, and look at him. He has not been sick other than those few weeks since he quit his job, back when he was 65. He never gets a cold, and look at him literally. Does he not look like he's about 50? And the answer is yes. It's surprising. I mean, there it is, what exercise will do for one. Except now you got the question. And you should know by now that I've raised the specter in a far more complex manner than the words would denote. But the question is, all right, you mean 10 miles of running every day is what has made this 83-year-old man continue to live and be so healthy? Or is it because he has lived so long, is still living so long, and is so healthy, it's why he gets out and has to run 10 miles every day? Of course, this is back infringing upon that great area that life still has other people talk about as to, well, perhaps we've reached the place that it's not simply a matter of it either being environment or heredity. It's in part heredity and then the impact of the environment. That's the progress life has made over the last 6,000 years. In general, not limited to a certain few. As to what it's going to accomplish remains to be seen. But it's a variation of that, and it would seem to be, even though some of you now think, all right, I can peer between the cracks, given the two possibilities. That is it the exercise that made him live so long and be so healthy, or is it because he's so healthy that he has to exercise, he has no choice? You didn't forget your place, did you? Where I started this was that all this apparently is some great personal undertaking, some great sacrifice, something you've got to do. But remember this, if you didn't have the chemical makeup to belong here, you could listen to me talk forever, you could fast forever, you could meditate forever, you could read all the great mystical books in the world, you could chant, you could dance, you could whirl, you could pray, you could pursue every religion in the world, and you'd get sick and die of tuberculosis when you were 43, looking like a prune and real miserable. You know, if you got this far, and there's any chance that you actually belong here, besides those of you that wander from week to week, if you belong here, you've got a very sturdy molecular background, or you wouldn't be here. Or, look at it another way, you won't be here long. You'll die on us. I didn't bring this up for some small laugh, because again, consciousness never looks at it this way. Remembering consciousness being our great social climber, is that anything I've done, it says. I mean, as a matter of fact, you don't know, consciousness says to somebody. Your partner says to somebody else's partner, you didn't know me 10, 15 years ago. I was a very weak child. I was fat. I was unathletic. And then I don't know, something happened. I read a book. Something happened. I got laughed at by too many women. And I suddenly began to run and to work out in a gym. And I watched my diet. I got in pretty good shape physically. And now I realized I'm a peckerhead. So I went back to school. And then I read the great books of the Western world and part of the Southeastern world in my spare time. I did all this, and I've turned myself, I am not, if you'd seen me 20 years ago, you wouldn't have recognized me. I did it through willpower, through perseverance. Yeah, but where'd the willpower and the perseverance come from? Is that consciousness cannot understand that if the scenario I just detailed for you did apparently, observably happen in someone's life, molecularly speaking, they reached a certain point and they had to go to a gym. They had to change their diet. They had to lose weight. They had to go back to school. They had no choice. I could point out to you yet another version as to what is the purpose of this damn thing. To put it back in words, again, variation, what is this, number 27? I could say, quite literally, that the aim is to make consciousness conscious of itself and of its heritage. That's as good as any. I don't mean that in an offhand manner. That's as good as any. It's a lot better than, well, this is to become a Jew, to become a Muslim, to become a mystic. And that's even more limited to cut and dried experience. But as far as words go, the purpose of it could be quite properly said to be, is to make ordinary consciousness conscious of itself and of its heritage. If you had that, of course I can't ask for what more would you ask, because you don't know yet. And some of your partners would say a hell of a lot. That's why I don't get engaged. That's why I don't engage in chit-chat with your partners. Because they do more chitting than they do chatting, or vice versa. Question 2E. Question 3. It's a little super string left from last week. And I was talking about how would one grow without a partner? How could life grow? What would you, running down that great neuralizing path to Oz, if there were the quote gods, something outside the system itself, a god, gods that created this in some way, outside themselves, would the gods have, if it wasn't already existing, would they have to create their own partner? That is a very serious matter to pursue. And take my use of the word gods all the way from the historic use of your forefathers and to what you would, on a good day, understand about the reality behind it today. Then, if you would like an extension of that, if, taking my mapping of a tri-actual world being behind all of this, minimally speaking, that which you can experience in this lifetime, not through the senses, but that which you can experience. If we left the terminology of gods and the partner, how about this? What if there was just simply C-force? that was either the origins, or that was the sustaining force now, or that was life's hope for tomorrow, that was the driving power, somewhere in between all that. If there was simply C at one time, would C have to create D? Would C have to also create, I hate to do it to you, but would it have to create E? Or is there a possibility, would E come about in some way if C did create D? Well, a lot of people are going, let's jump back to the gods, all right? If the gods have to create their own partner, if the gods had to create their anathema, a demon, an anti-god, or if they did that, where does E fit into that scenario? That's what I thought. Not as many ha-has. For those of you out of town, I very often give out tasks, and I normally do not put them on the tape. But starting tonight, we're going to cut the tape, put a blank space in here for 20 or 30 seconds, and then I'm going to give the task. And it's only for you people meeting in other cities who are meeting now. It's not for you to ever use if you ever took excerpts from any of these tapes to use for your public trolling expeditions. The task is only for those who are attending the meetings now. But from now on, I will do it, and you people in these other cities, you take the task as sincerely as those here. If it's something that I ask to be turned in, some written report, some written observation, you can send it to me if you wish. If I say I want it written, I do want you to do it in that manner as though I were there and you were going to turn it in. But I'll leave it to all of you as to whether you, on a weekly or some spasmodic basis, want to send it to me. If you do, do so. If you do not feel the need after you have done the task, then you don't have to. But I will expect you henceforth to do the task as I described them. So I'll be back with a task in a few seconds. We're just going to black it out so that they can always be cut away from the tape. You got it blacked out? All right. Task for everyone in general was what I wanted you to do. So until the next time we meet, is for you to look about through your eyes, and then otherwise, if possible, and see what you can define and see what you can describe insofar as seeing, quote, types of people, vis-a-vis the kind of description that I started, the kind of mapping that I started, of how that you can see that there seems to be a certain continual type of person in general that you've seen before, that you can see now, you recognize them, and based upon the kinds of descriptions and mappings I've given, what can you see, if anything, now? Well, hey, now that you mention it, it's almost as though their blue circuit would be tied in a particular place to the red. The way their posture and the way apparently their emotions seem to be tied together, I can almost describe it, at least satisfactorily, to me on a temporary basis. See what you can do. Now, for you newer people out of town, that is, any of you who are not exposed to this task last year, I want you new people to do this. Take along a notebook everywhere you go, starting in the morning. Everywhere you go, and from the time you get up to the time you go to bed, until this time next week, once an hour, I want you to do something creative. I want you to write an aphorism, a truism, if you can sketch it all. Just anything you want to do. Once an hour, just stop and try and draw somebody's face that you just passed. Try and draw a tree. If you're musically inclined and you got anywhere that you can do it, if you're good, just do it in your own head. Write a song. Run to the bathroom, off your job, go get in a stall and try and write a song right quick. But put it on paper. At least write a verse. And then next hour, put in the chorus. Something. I'll leave it to you. You can't do it wrong. Just something that to you is creative. If it's just an observation, but it's got to be put in some kind of form, like a proverb. But once an hour is to do something creative every waking hour for 1 week.